Overnight, progressives facing a big setback in Arizona. Look at that spread there. That's big. As primary election results continue to pour in from the Grand Canyon state.
So let's talk about some primary elections that took place this week, because to make a long story short, the far left DSA communist candidates just faced a serious reality check after it turns out that their crazy brand of politics is not exactly that viable in actual swing states outside of deep blue metropolises, typically in deep blue states. Oh, guess what? People are not really big fans of these whack jobs, which is such a big surprise, right? It's not exactly as if we've been trying to tell you that. And arguably, you could say this spells bad news for the far left candidates running in general election season. However, at the same time, you could also make the case that, well, maybe it's almost more concerning because Democrats are setting up the system on purpose where they can build their majorities using the communists in deep blue states, because that's kind of how the House and the Senate works, right? You sort of build up your mass of the safe blue senators and safe blue congressmen, and then in the swing districts, we're going to pretend to be moderate. So I'm not exactly sure if it's the biggest victory of all time here, but it is very interesting to point out, hey, amongst normal center-leaning Americans in center-leaning states, oh, look at what just happened in Arizona. The far-left candidates got absolutely destroyed. But on the flip side, I think it's also worth noting we witnessed yet another example of the absolute power that Trump still wields over the Republican Party. He's expanding his nearly undefeated win streak this season, even in a state like Arizona, which let's not forget is historically the home of what? John McCain, some of those brands of Republicans. Historically, MAGA has struggled in some of these recent years, but it's looking like that McCain influence increasingly either just completely going away or they've basically become Democrats at this point. You look at the way Arizona trended, by the way, in 2024. I think there are actually strong signs to be optimistic about this state, which we felt for a while. Oh, we're losing, you know, it's on the way out. It's going to become a blue state. Hey, wait a minute, not so fast. Let's talk about all of it. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, last night in Arizona's 4th congressional district, we witnessed a battle we've seen a million different times in this cycle, and we know how it usually goes. Here you have a Democrat incumbent congressman coming from whatever you might call the establishment wing of the party, going up against a DSA-endorsed far-left communist candidate. Typically, again, most of the times we've seen it happen in this cycle, the far leftist wins every single time, but not the case in, again, the actual swing state. Like, this is a hilarious reality check for a lot of these people. Turns out instead, the incumbent Democrat wins by over 30 points. No, we're not making that up. Take a listen.
Socialist wave taking over America, falling short in Arizona as moderate Congressman Greg Stanton was able to fend off progressive DSA challenger Kai Newkirk in the state's Democratic primary. But this comes after major socialist victories in states like New York and Colorado. Byron York, a Fox News contributor, joins us now. Good morning, Byron. Why did the socialist candidate fall short in Arizona, but why are they seeing success elsewhere in the country?
Well, I think we saw that the suburbs of Phoenix are not quite as radically blue as some other areas of the country. So the DSA, it would have been a huge story if the DSA had knocked off another Democratic incumbent, but they didn't do that.
Yeah, well, what do you know? What a big surprise and shocker that it turns out suburban voters in swing states. You mean to tell me the very type of people who actually do decide national elections are not big fans of the DSA far leftist types? I know that is a shock. That is a true epiphany, is it not? But still, regardless, I will say I think it's generally good news if you're concerned about the far left extremist takeover of this country. A good reminder, hey, this stuff still does have a pretty limited appeal. Good to see that. Although at the same time, again, my concern here remains that, well, if Democrats do take the House, this is an actually very effective way to do that. You relegate all your crazy communist candidates to deep blue districts that they're going to win, and then in the actual swing states, run these fake poser moderates, and then guess what you have? A political majority that, even if they're not full of DSA communists, doesn't matter. They have the voting power, they have the caucus to basically control the Democrat establishment, which I would argue already is really happening, right? We've explained how, hey, at the end of the day, the establishment really is serving their radical base, but that's actually a way to expand their power, right? In the same sense that Republicans have those swing districts, the more moderate Republicans, like let's say a Susan Collins or a Mike Lawler, same situation here with them. So don't get too complacent or write off, oh, this clearly means that there won't be a communist takeover of America. No, see, they don't need to win every single battle to win the war. And that's what we have to stay vigilant about. Even think, by the way, to 2028. Folks, I don't think it's exactly a crazy far out idea to say, hey, it's possible that one of these far left characters may end up winning the Democrat nomination, right? I don't necessarily think it's a shoe-in for Newsom or any of the establishment picks, because as we've seen in most Democrat primaries, besides this one, for example, the crazy far leftists keep on winning. And the thing is, while a national general election, let's say like the 2028 election, is going to heavily come down to these types of voters, like Arizona suburban voters, 100%, let's also consider how a Democrat primary on the presidential level is going to work. It's going to be a nationwide election, which is to say, in a lot of the especially deep blue states, if those people are going to vote for the socialists, I'm not sure the swing states are going to be able to cancel that out. The math does not add up. And so arguably, while you might sit here and say, oh, look, the swing districts, the swing states, whatever, the chances, I would argue, looking ahead based on these trends of Newsom not securing the nomination, or some far leftist, he could come out of nowhere, it could be an AOC or whatever, of securing the nomination in 28 still is relatively high by historical standards. Now, I'm sure the Democrat establishment is going to do their normal game where they try to all team up and collude to take down the leftists. Like, for example, remember in 2020 when I believe it was Pete Buttigieg and a lot of those moderate Democrats dropped out to help Biden, but Elizabeth Warren intentionally stayed in the race to screw over Bernie Sanders, right? They could still try to play those types of games and expect them to be coming, but not sure if that's going to work. I still think in many ways the radical takeover of the Democrat Party, again, has already happened, but if you want to talk about those people being officially your national candidates, I don't think is all that far off. But hey, maybe the good news is that judging by the trends of suburban swing state voters, if that happened, 2028 would have gotten a little bit easier for us. So good news there at the same time. Now, that's the story out of the Democrat Party. Again, huge wake-up call for these people, although I'm not sure they care because they live in their little like echo chamber bubble anyway. But still, regardless, let's now talk about the Republican primaries that took place last night in Arizona, because you look at a lot of the trends we have seen throughout this year. Think about, say, a Cassidy in Louisiana, a Massey in Kentucky, many different others, the Indiana state senators, remember those characters? That a lot of, we'll call them anti-MAGA rhino characters, have gone down time and time again. But arguably, Arizona might be the true litmus test of where we are, because we remember how this story has gone. Think about Carrie Lake. Think about John, her struggles to secure that kind of 10% of McCain Republicans, and ultimately, arguably, it costing her the elections in the times that she ran. Or, think about, again, just the influence that the McCain side of the aisle has been having on this state. Well, last night, folks, if you want any idea of where we are in sort of the slow but sure collapse of rhinoism, ladies and gentlemen, turns out Donald Trump just went 7-0 That's right, 7-0, undefeated in the state of Arizona, sweeping the GOP primaries. And the Trump pick, Andy Biggs here, who's a very solid congressman, by the way. I have no doubt he'll be a fantastic governor, but also dominated the Republican primary, winning about over 70% of the vote. Now, keep in mind, in the past 2 cycles, when we had Carrie Lake running in those primaries versus Robson, I believe her name was, she was sort of the, like, John McCain endorsed, that kind of figure of the party, right? Very close primaries. Now, what's happening? Look at the dramatic shift we've seen in Arizona in just a couple of years. Folks, very good news.
Endorsement power holding strong in the key swing state of Arizona and scoring multiple primary wins last night.
Madeline Rivera is live in Washington with the results. Maddie, what happened?
Yeah, first in a gubernatorial race, guys, Republican Congressman Andy Biggs' win sets up what could be one of the most competitive races for governor this November. He is set to face Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs, who's running for another term. Republicans feel bullish about their chances of picking up this seat in a state that President Trump won in 2024.
And by the way, folks, as much as we love to all sit around and be constant panicans and pessimistic black pillars, I do think it is worth noting that the long-term trends recently in Arizona have been looking very positive for us. Because think, for example, back to 2020, you all remember the highly suspicious situation that went down there, but also in 2022, we basically got swept in many ways at the Senate level, the governor level, and yet in 2024, watch what happened. What we perceived to be basically a toss-up swing state ended up going, if you remember, like I believe it was 5 to 6 points in favor of Trump, which is not really what we even consider to be a swing state margin in electoral politics. The state of Arizona has had a dramatic shift to the right all of a sudden, right? And think about that. Same thing with, for example, Texas. Remember Blexus, the idea of blue Texas that was huge in the late 2010s, and then the way in which we sort of swung the pendulum back? Not all long-term trends in this country are demographically or electorally bad for conservatives. I think it is also worth noting, hey, there are things like this to be optimistic about. And frankly, when you look especially, yes, to this 2026 governor's race, I think you are looking at something that is heavily in play. I mean, granted, sure, Katie Hobbs will have the Democrat advantage. It will likely be a midterm advantage on behalf of Democrats because that's just how the typical incumbent versus opposition party dynamic works. But let's also not forget, not all states follow the same trend. For whatever reason it is, Arizona has gotten more red in the past couple of years. Unlike, say, a state like, let's say, I don't know, Georgia or something like that, you know, some states are getting more Republican, as a matter of fact. Some swing states are getting more Republican, which is good news. Think about Florida, too, by the way. Remember when Florida was a swing state, you know? And what are the reasons for Arizona becoming more red? I think it's a couple of different things. You look at the border, for example, how much that obviously traumatized the state. But by the way, the Hispanic realignment in that state, absolutely worth noting. Turns out the Hispanics were not the biggest fan of the Biden border crisis, of, you know, inflation during those years and all those things. But I think it's also worth noting, too, you know, Californians, right? Oftentimes seen as being a bad thing and net negative moving to your state. Sometimes that is certainly true, but I know this from personal experience as a native Californian. Many people who are conservative are moving to states like Nevada and Arizona to escape California, which, by the way, Nevada, historically blue states, turned that place now into a swing state. Arizona, a swing state as a couple years ago, now becoming more red. And so this is all to say, you combine that, you look at this governor's race where Andy Biggs clearly unified the vast majority of conservatives. 75% or so is basically a landslide at the primary level. So doesn't appear to be someone who's facing that McCain Republican boycott like Carrie Lake did, or perhaps those people just have kind of completely gone by the wayside in the Republican Party. Look at Trump's influence now on the voters. Doesn't really matter, but he's a strong guy, right? Strong candidate. Then we look on the flip side to Katie Hobbs. Someone who, in many ways, you probably haven't heard about this woman in many years, but is completely, I don't even know how to describe this, ditzy and incompetent, would that be the word? Currently, as a matter of fact. She is saying she will not commit to debating Andy Biggs ahead of Arizona's 2026 governor election. And look at her too, by the way. Big reason for this. Why? Is because if you remember back to the time she's had to debate, she is utterly terrible on stage. She clearly has some type of performance anxiety, or she's just incompetent. I don't know. But this is all to say, right? You are talking about someone who, sure, may have midterm factors and incumbent advantage at her back. I don't know if it's going to be enough. I believe that not only is this governorship completely in play, not to get arrogant, I would pin us maybe even as the slight favorites, just looking at the current trends electorally in Arizona and maybe separating that noise from other things that are going on nationally. Again, look at the Democrat primary even, right? Like, this is sort of a different world than, let's say, the generalized national environment. It's kind of a unique state nowadays in many ways. Absolutely could see that. So this is very good news, I think, on both sides, right? Because you're watching a situation where, again, not only did the radical socialists kind of get rejected in the state of Arizona, which, you know, it's always fun to see that, but especially in a place that has struggled historically with MAGA and specifically the Trump brand of politics, that's all over now, right? The fog of that has washed away. Here we go. Here we go, guys. So good news all around, I will say. That said, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.